San Quentin just changed forever. Inside America's most shocking prison transformation. The thick stone walls of San Quentin had stood for more than 160 years as one of the most feared prisons in America. For generations, it was known as the Bastille by the Bay. It housed California's largest death row. It held some of the country's most notorious criminals. Life inside was hard, crowded cells, limited programs, and a heavy feeling that once you entered, hope often stayed outside the gates. Families waited years for visits, wondering if their loved one would ever come home ready to start over. Guards worked long shifts knowing that tension could flare up at any moment. The prison's reputation was so strong that many people believed nothing could ever change it. Then, on March 17, 2023, everything shifted in a way no one expected. Governor Gavin Newsom stood right there on the grounds of San Quentin and made a promise that shocked the state and the nation. He looked straight into the cameras, surrounded by legislators, survivors of crime, victim advocates, civil rights leaders, and correctional staff, and announced that San Quentin would no longer be defined only by punishment. It would become the San Quentin Rehabilitation Center, a place built on education, job training, dignity, and real second chances. The news spread fast. For families who had loved ones inside, it felt like a lifeline. Mothers who had driven hours every weekend for decades suddenly had tears in their eyes, daring to hope that their son might finally get the tools to rebuild his life. Fathers who had missed birthdays and school events felt a spark of possibility they hadn't felt in years. Even some victims' families, who carried deep pain, began to see that true justice could include helping people change so they never hurt anyone again. Governor Newsom didn't stop with words. He created the San Quentin Transformation Advisory Council, a group of experts, former inmates, correctional officers, community leaders, and people who truly understood the system from every side. In May 2023, the council began its work. They studied successful rehabilitation models from around the world, especially the Norwegian approach that focused on dignity, normalcy, and preparing people to return home as better citizens. Their goal was clear: reduce crime by giving people the skills and support they needed to succeed outside the walls. Inside the prison, the announcement landed like a wave of emotion. Residents heard it over the prison radio or from staff. Many men who had spent decades feeling invisible suddenly felt seen. One longtime resident later shared that, for the first time in years, he allowed himself to believe he could still have a future. Small changes started right away. Staff began using the word residents instead of just inmates to remind everyone that these were human beings with potential. Programs expanded. Education and job training became a bigger focus. The transformation also meant facing the prison's painful past. California had already placed a moratorium on the death penalty. Now the state began moving forward with plans to repurpose death row housing and close the execution chamber. Hundreds of men who had waited years on death row were transferred to other facilities. The space that once symbolized finality started to become part of a new vision for hope and growth. For the next 3 years, the hard work continued quietly but steadily. The state poured resources into planning and building. Construction crews worked around the clock. The goal was not just to fix the old San Quentin, it was to create something entirely new inside the historic walls. The entire facility was being reimagined as the San Quentin Rehabilitation Center, the first major step in what became known as the California model. Families outside felt the emotional weight of every update. Letters from inside the prison started talking about new classes and new hope. Mothers saved every letter, reading them over and over. Children who had only known their fathers through glass partitions began to dream about real family time again. The whole state watched closely. Some people cheered the bold change. Others doubted it could work. But the process was moving forward, step by step, with real people's lives at the center. By early 2026, the biggest visible sign of change was almost ready. A brand new $239 million learning center had been built in just 18 months, the fastest major state construction project in California history. The 3-building campus, covering more than 81,000 square feet, sat above the lower yard with beautiful views of the San Francisco Bay. It included modern classrooms, a large library where residents could actually browse books themselves, technology and media spaces, recording studios, a cafe, and areas for job training and reentry services. The opening date was set for February 20th, 2026. As that day approached, the emotion inside San Quentin grew stronger every single day. Residents talked about it constantly. Staff prepared with a renewed sense of purpose. Families counted down the days. No one could deny it anymore. San Quentin was changing forever. February 20th, 2026 became a day that many people inside and outside the prison will remember for the rest of their lives. Governor Gavin Newsom returned to San Quentin for the official ribbon cutting of the new San Quentin Learning Center. The moment was historic. Cameras captured him cutting the ribbon on the 3-building campus that had been completed in record time. He stood in front of residents, staff, and guests and called the Learning Center the crown jewel of the transformation. "This is no longer a place defined only by punishment," the governor said. "Today we are proving that rehabilitation and public safety go hand in hand. Hope is a powerful tool for safer communities." The new facility nearly tripled the amount of classroom and programming space. It offered adult basic education, high school and GED programs, vocational training in high-demand jobs, college courses, and direct connections to reentry services that would help residents find housing and work when they left. For the first time, the library allowed residents to choose their own books. Classrooms were bright and modern with natural light and views of the bay. Recording studios gave residents new ways to express themselves and learn skills. A cafe and community spaces helped create a feeling of normalcy inside the walls. Inside the prison, residents watched the ceremony on screens. Many had tears in their eyes. Men who had spent 10, 20, or even 30 years behind bars suddenly saw a future they could work toward. One resident who had been there for decades later described the feeling. "It was like the whole prison took a deep breath and finally saw light at the end of a long tunnel." For the first time in years, many allowed themselves to believe they could go home and make their families proud. The emotional impact reached far beyond the walls. Families across California felt it deeply. Mothers who had prayed for years for their sons to have a real chance called each other crying tears of joy. Fathers who had missed so many milestones of their children's lives began planning how they could become positive role models again. Even some victims and survivors started to see that when people leave prison better than when they arrived, everyone in society becomes safer. Staff members who had worked at San Quentin for years also felt the shift. Correctional officers who once focused mainly on security were now part of something bigger. They saw residents lighting up during classes and programs. Many officers said the changes gave them a renewed sense of purpose in their jobs. One officer quietly shared that he came to the prison to keep people safe, and now he realized that helping residents prepare for successful reentry was one of the best ways to keep communities safe. The transformation included more than just the new buildings. The California model, inspired by successful approaches from other countries, brought changes across the facility. East Block, which once housed death row, began conversion into rehabilitative housing. The upper yard was being repurposed for expanded recreation and community space. Residents were encouraged to participate in programs that built normal life skills, accountability, and personal growth. College programs expanded too. Cal State LA and other institutions started offering more bachelor's degree opportunities inside the prison. Residents earned certificates in welding, coding, culinary arts, and other trades that could lead to real jobs upon release. Therapy and substance use treatment programs grew stronger. The focus was on treating people with dignity while still holding them accountable. Not every moment was easy. The transition brought challenges and questions. Some people wondered if the changes would truly reduce recidivism. Others worried about safety during the shift. But the state stayed committed. They listened to feedback from residents, staff, and experts. Every step was guided by the goal of creating a model that could eventually help other prisons across California and the country. By spring 2026, the Learning Center began full operations. Residents started attending classes in the bright new spaces. Stories of real progress began to spread. One man earned his GED after decades without schooling. Another completed a vocational certification and already had a job lined up for his release date. A father wrote a heartfelt letter to his daughter saying he was learning every day so he could be the man she deserved when he came home. The entire state watched as San Quentin proved that even America's most notorious prison could choose a different path. The old reputation was slowly being replaced by a new story, one of hope, education, and second chances. As the San Quentin Learning Center opened its doors in spring 2026, the transformation became more than just buildings and programs. It became a living example of what is possible when a system decides to focus on rehabilitation instead of only punishment. Residents walked into modern classrooms with natural light and bay views. They sat in the new library and chose books for themselves. They practiced skills in the technology center and recording studios. They met with reentry specialists who helped them plan for life after release. The emotional stories coming out of the prison touched people across the country. A resident who had been incarcerated since he was a teenager said the new center made him feel like the outside world was finally reaching in to say, "You still matter. You can still grow." Another man who had spent more than 20 years inside described finally feeling believed in for the first time. These weren't just words, they were real feelings shared by people who had lived through the old system and were now experiencing something new. Families felt the change deeply during visits. Mothers who had driven for hours every week now heard their sons talk excitedly about classes and future plans. Children who had only known their fathers through prison visits began to imagine real family time again. Letters from inside carried new hope. One father wrote to his kids, "Daddy is learning every day so I can come home and be the man you deserve." Staff members also shared their own emotional journeys. Correctional officers who had spent years in high-stress environments now saw residents engaged and motivated. Many said the changes gave them a renewed sense of purpose. They were no longer just keeping order, they were helping people prepare to return to their communities as better citizens. Governor Newsom and the team behind the California model made it clear that this was only the beginning. The Learning Center was the first major step in a larger series of updates. More changes were coming, more housing focused on rehabilitation, more community spaces, and more programs designed to reduce recidivism and make California safer for everyone. The transformation showed that real change is possible even in a place with such a difficult history. San Quentin had once been a symbol of the old system: punishment, isolation, and little hope. Now it was becoming a national model for education, dignity, and successful reentry. The state was proving that public safety and rehabilitation could work together. As residents began full use of the new center, the impact continued to grow. More people earned certificates and degrees. More families saw real progress during visits. More staff felt proud of the work they were doing. The story of San Quentin's transformation spread far beyond California. People across the country began talking about what could happen when a prison chooses hope over hopelessness. This is the real story of how San Quentin changed forever. It started with a bold announcement in 2023, continued through years of planning and hard work, and it reached a historic milestone in February 2026 with the opening of the Learning Center. The journey is still going, but one thing is clear: San Quentin is no longer the same place it once was. It is now a place where lives can begin again, a place where education replaces despair, a place where second chances are real, and a place that proves that even America's most shocking prisons can become symbols of hope for a better future. The transformation of San Quentin shows us all that change is possible when we believe in the power of rehabilitation, when we invest in people, and when we choose to build a system that helps people return home stronger than when they left. This is the new story of San Quentin, and it is only just beginning.